Today's episode of the Counseling Tutor podcast is sponsored by WebHealer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. WebHealer are offering Counseling Tutor podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, WebHealer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the WebHealer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, WebHealer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counselingtutor.com/website. That's counselingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 300 of the Counselling Tutor podcast. Our guest today has a diploma in counselling, is a lecturer and a clinical supervisor, holds a Plato Award for outstanding use of technology in education, and is a fellow of the Teaching Awards. The eagle-eared amongst you may very well have guessed who the guest is. It's indeed myself, and I'll be chatting to Ken about a lecture I presented for the Counsellor CPD Library titled 5 Practical Trauma Interventions. So with that said, let's get on with today's episode.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Rory and I bid you a very warm welcome to the Counseling Tutor podcast. You've joined us, as Rory said, as episode 300, 3 stops on today's journey, starting off with our ethical, sustainable practice, where we're going to be speaking about practicing online therapy with clients that are not in your country of residence, or if you're in the United States, that are outside of your state. We then go into Practice Matters, and we have a very special interview with Rory Lees Oakes. You may recognize that name. And of course, you heard the introduction of that, where we're going to be talking about practical trauma-informed interventions, a lecture that Rory did and a course that Rory built for Counseling Tutor, and why that was built. And then we go on to student services, where we recognize you, the student, on your formal journey. And of course, as this podcast goes out, it's around the time where there's a lot of exam submissions and final portfolio admissions. So we're going to be speaking about preparing for those final submissions of that coursework. But starting us off, Rory, in that ethical, sustainable practice, we're delving into the world of online and telephone therapy. And we're speaking about practicing online, but with clients that may not be in your country of residence, or if you're in the United States, in your actual state. Rory, what do we need to consider there?
Well, I think it's very interesting, Ken. Before 2020, online counselling was kind of quite a niche activity, and then the pandemic came, everybody was in lockdown, and we had to find a new way of working, and that was online. And that's now become a mainstream offering counselling. You can work online, or you can work face-to-face, or you can work hybrid. You might see a client online, you might see them face-to-face. So this has now become standard practice now within counselling. But I guess a second-order consequence of this is that the tools you can use to work online, be they, text or email, video chat, or phone, work all over the world. And some therapists are now starting to work with people in different countries. And reasons for that is you might have someone who's emigrated, or someone who's working abroad, or even someone who lives abroad who wants a speciality. Maybe they're looking for a specialisation and they can only find it in a different country. So when we come to thinking about working with clients abroad, there are some definite considerations. And I'm going to start off by saying, if you're a student listening to this, this part's for qualified practitioners, but if you're a student, think about, speaking with your tutor if you're working online and the client goes abroad. That's all I'll say on that. But in terms of general practice, I think the first place to go is just check with your insurance company. Every qualified therapist should have their own indemnity insurance, and it's worth having a chat with your insurance company and asking their view on if you can work in a different country and getting that in writing. Because if things go wrong, the legal world is very expensive, and that is what you have insurance for. So I think the first stop there, Ken, is check with your insurance company and tell them what part of the world you are going to be working in virtually.
Yes, very, very important. I think the important part of this topic is that with online telephone counseling or therapy, psychotherapy, there is a massive opportunity. I mean, there was a time where you, as a counselor, you may only have had access to your local town or people within a certain radius of your practice because there was a requirement to meet in person. And technology has bridged an amazing gap, and it has given us that amazing opportunity. So us in the United Kingdom, we can basically counsel anybody in the United Kingdom. But as soon as we go outside of our country or our jurisdiction, that is the word that is used in when we kind of discuss this, we need to be aware that there are different laws and licensing requirements in different parts of the world. And they vary from country to country, and they also vary from state to state if you're based in the United States of America. And taking this into consideration is really, really important. And I guess it's about being informed, doing the required training that you would need to do. So it is possible to work outside of your country or outside of your jurisdiction, but as long as you've kind of ticked the boxes, that you've looked really closely. So licensing and legal considerations, counsellors need to understand the licensing requirements, not only in their own country. So I'm going to use an example, you might be based in the United Kingdom and understand your laws, but you need to understand the laws in the country where the client is based as well. So you're basically taking two different legal frameworks before you even start that relationship. And you also need to look at the ethical considerations, so ethical bodies or licensing requirements in the two countries as well. So you'll be working to an ethical framework with your professional body that oversees your practice. When you're working in a different country, you need to look at what are the licensing requirements within that country. And it may well be that your level of qualification is not relevant or not recognized in another country. And of course, there are now platforms, telehealth platforms that are kind of bill themselves as being international, and they may be matching you up with a client that is outside of your geographic location. And it may feel just natural to get online and work with that person, and it may go very well, and it may go very well for many months and many years. But this is about if something does go wrong, if a client does get into a difficulty, if there is a legal application or side of this, or if there is a complaint levied, that's when all of this comes into effect, and it becomes really, really difficult. And as you've said, Rory, after considering the licensing and legal considerations, your insurance and your liability, and you may well find that you face higher premiums on your insurance if you're working outside of your country. And there are also instances where your insurer may not cover you for certain countries. So it's really, really important that you kind of, dot the I's, cross the T's before embarking on working internationally, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a very complex picture. And I think that there's not a lot of case law around it. So in other words, no one's actually, as far as I know, has actually had to go to court because someone's complained. And once case law is laid down, that means that's a standard my little understanding of the law, that's a standard definition. People can refer to it and say, well, in that case, this happened and this is what the judge ruled. So you have to be very, very, very thoughtful. My thoughts on this is, the United States of America is a regulated area. They work under what they call the HIPAA laws. And, even counseling from state to state isn't permitted. So if you're in, Chicago and you want to work with a client in, say, San Francisco, actually you can't online because each state has its own regulations. So that could be quite complicated. And as Ken has alluded to, if you're working in Europe, in Europe, a lot of the titles for psychotherapists, they're protected titles. In some cases, you need a psychology degree. So I think, you need to think very, very, very carefully about where you're working. And I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but I think there are 19 countries in the world where it's illegal to be gay. It's just unbelievable to think like this, isn't it, in 2024? And if you're working in one of those countries, you need to be very, very thoughtful of, protecting the client. The client could find themselves in some difficulty. So I think a lot of consideration and I think a lot of supervision. And I think that brings me on to another aspect, that if you're working online, you should have a supervisor who has an understanding of online working and someone who's trained in online and telephone counselling, because, when you're making these decisions, you're making them usually with professional advice and professional consultation. And having a supervisor that understands and works online, I think is just essential, Ken.
Yeah, definitely. And a great starting point is also to look to your professional organization to whose professional ethical framework you work. So I just pulled one up at random today from the UK Council for Psychotherapy. That's the UKCP, based here in the United Kingdom. And it states, when working with clients who are overseas, you will need to meet the legal requirements for both their current location and yours. This will include requiring their full name, phone number, date of birth, in case there's a need for a third person parties to make contact in case of an emergency. And it's emergency numbers. I mean, I know what my emergency number is here in the United Kingdom, Rory, because it's kind of top of mind. So if I have an emergency, I'm going to pick up my phone and know exactly what to dial. But what would I dial if I was working with somebody in France and they got into difficulty when we were in the conversation? What is the emergency phone number in France or any other country? I'm just using that as an example. Yeah. And there are times that you may need to contact Interpol. So if you're working across lines, international borders, Interpol, in a position where maybe in your local country you would maybe need to break confidentiality to the police, you may need to break confidentiality to Interpol. Yeah. Do you have those contact details? Are they part of your book of numbers that you keep on hand? So there's so much there to take into consideration just from an ethical and a legal perspective. And then, of course, there's the technological challenge as well, where there are so many different online platforms that can be used for communication. And you started this, Rory. We say online and telephone working, and you kindly kind of broadened that to that might be texts, that might be telephone working, that might be emails, counseling somebody via email. It may be that you're meeting them over video. Well, what is the platform? How are you sending and receiving that communication? What are the legalities in your country? What are the legalities in the place where the person that you're working with are staying? What are the data protection laws in your country? What are the data protection laws in their country? Is that platform compliant in both countries? And it's just another level of consideration. And I did a look around, and there's a law firm called DLA Piper. And they have a wonderful article on telehealth regulations around the world. And they've got a breakdown of every country and what their requirements are, what their legal requirements are. This is starting with Argentina, going all the way down to Zimbabwe. And I was looking over this, and it's really, really interesting. There are countries where laws apply that I would never even have imagined it. And we can't just not look. We can't go in uninformed. It's about training, initial core training to work online via telephone or via technology. And then on top of that, it's the continuing professional development. Because one of the things that I notice when looking at the requirements in different countries, a lot of the legislation is under review at the moment, quite rightly so, because of the rise in telehealth or online or telephone counseling. There has been a rise across the world, as you started, Rory, saying about COVID kind of lifted the boat on remote working. And there is a requirement to look at the laws to protect clients and to protect the counseling and psychotherapy around the world. So it is changing. So that requires continuous professional development, having a place that you can go to look for that. And we will include in today's show notes, we'll put in a link to DLA Piper. They are a law firm that specialize in the law of telehealth in different countries, and you can refer to that and see what it's at. At least gives you a reference starting point on that, Rory.
Yes, I think that'd be very, very useful. And also the thing to consider is cultural considerations. You know, a lot of, well, I think probably most therapy comes from a kind of Eurocentric or American-centric perspective. And if you're working in other countries, working with people from different cultures, they may have a very different view on what therapy is and how it's conducted. And I was speaking to a colleague who was working with clients, I think it was in Zimbabwe, and it wasn't unusual for all the relatives to be in the room and listening on the call. This would be considered culturally appropriate. So you have to respect cultural differences, and I think that is about CPD. I think if you're working want to work in a different country, try and use a search engine to find out if there's anything specific in other countries that's culturally different to us. I think that is really, really, really important. And the other thing is boundaries. The difficulty with online work, and we touch on this in the online and telephone counselling course that we offer, and many therapists have taken, is disinhibition effect. The idea is that we're more likely to maybe disclose more, or not apply the kind of social etiquette rules that we would have if we were meeting people face to face, because we're working online. We're one step away from someone. And I think that you need to consider things like social media. If clients are trying to add you as Facebook friends or hooking up with you on LinkedIn or that type of thing, you really do need to manage that boundary. And it can be quite difficult, because for a lot of people, social media is the kind of social oil that runs their lives. You know, you meet someone and the first thing you do is, I'll put you onto my social media. If you're a therapist, you need to be able to say, well, I'm afraid I can't do that, because it's not a professional thing for me to do, to befriend my clients, and that can be a difficult conversation. And also, I just wanted to pick up, Ken, on assessment, because if you're working in different countries, you've got to make a call on two things. One is assess the mental well-being of the client. Are they in a position emotionally and mentally to be able to take on therapy online? If they're very, very unwell, that might be very difficult. But also, can they work the technology? The best will in the world, if you're asking someone, as kind of myself are now, we're working across a video platform to record this. Both of us have to have a certain amount of technical ability, and we need a stable internet connection. So that's something that I think needs attention. Are you confident that if you do meet someone online, you can sustain the relationship with the technology you're using? Because I couldn't think of anything worse than having a therapy session, someone talking about something that's very difficult, and then all of a sudden the internet goes off.
Yeah,
I think that would be awful. You can't connect again. So you need to be thoughtful. I think everybody needs to be thoughtful of that. It's difficult enough sometimes in the UK, to be honest. But if you're working internationally, that can be difficult as well. So really thinking about the technology, is it sustainable to use? And also the assessment, is someone in a place where they can form and sustain therapeutic relationship.
So important, Rory. That's a really, really good point. And I have a live example that has happened just recently to me. I lived in South Africa for many, many years, and I still have family and friends there, which I meet with regularly over online technology, shall we say, on an online video platform, and have a chat with them. And I have lost connection many times. And the reason for that is in South Africa, there is something called rolling blackouts, and it's because of the electricity supply and there not being enough to supply to the whole of the country. So they limit the supply of electricity, and you might be cut off for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. And of course, they let the local people know what time their area is going to be affected. But it's something else to take into consideration. You could be speaking to somebody, you're maybe not aware of that. And as you say, Rory, they're just about to share something that is really important to them, and suddenly that they maybe say something, and then the connection is gone. And they're gone. It's called the black hole effect. And if you do formal counseling, online counseling and telephone counseling training, you cover all of these incidences and get to kind of critically think around how you might manage and deal with that. It's an important topic. You mentioned, Rory, Zimbabwe, and as you were saying it, I thought, I wonder what the legislation in Zimbabwe is. And I now know that as of the 3rd of April 2023, the law that governs medical practice in the Health Professions Act, it's chapter 2719, it's called the Act, and it regulates healthcare professionals in Zimbabwe. And it would then mean, if I was having a client there, that I would need to go and look at that act and understand what can be done and how it works. And that is just, I guess, it's not, how can I say here? There's the thinking. I can counsel. I know what I'm doing. I've seen loads of clients. It's the same skills. I'm just going to take them online and I'm going to practice my skills online, and it's going to be the same. And it is the same, yet it's very, very different. And I think that is the main message here. And it's imperative that you do the correct training. Core counseling training, unless you've specifically covered online and telephone working, does not prepare you for online and telephone working. It is a specialist training. And if you look to the ethical frameworks in your country, it'll direct you. Here in the United Kingdom, it directs that we should get the correct training. And as you said, Rory, supervision from a supervisor who has also been trained so they can guide and hold our practice on the platform that we're working on. So much consideration. We're going to drop the link for all the different countries from DLA Piper law firm, and you can get that by going to counselingtutor.com. That's our website. Click on the podcast tab, go to episode 300, and the link is right there for telehealth regulation throughout the world. And of course, if you want to train in online and telephone counseling, there are many providers out there, but Counseling Tutor do have a certificate in online and telephone working, and you can find that by going to counselingtutor.com. Right there on the homepage, just look for online and telephone counseling. You can see the next intake date for our online and telephone counseling course. And we've tried to make that really affordable so that it's accessible to all, because we do realize that it's a time where we need to level up those skills, I guess, Rory, in service of the clients that we meet, whether they be in our country or outside of it.
Absolutely, Ken. And, the online offering now is mainstream. It's a mainstream offering. It's not a niche offering anymore. And I think lots of therapists who, are making their living out of therapy will be using, a mixed economy, be it in the room or be it online. So having the correct training is, I think, ethically important, and also gives you confidence in working with clients online. And I think both of those things are really important.
Thank you. And that is our ethical, sustainable practice for today. We now move on to Practice Matters. This is the CPD section of the Counseling Tutor podcast. It's where we will bring you an expert in a certain topic. Usually Rory will reach out and interview that person and kind of bring some little gems that we can take and maybe apply within our practice. And today a little bit different. So Rory's not reaching out and interviewing. It's going to be done live right here. Why? Because our guest is Rory Lees-Oakes, director and founder at counselingtutor.com. And we're going to be speaking, Rory, about a lecture that you did recently, which is in our CPD library for qualified practitioners, but also a course that you have built that is running at the moment. We're running the waiting list at Counseling Tutor for the next intake of that, and that is to become a trauma-informed practitioner. And I guess the first question, Rory, is why trauma-informed? Why lecture on that? Why build a course around trauma-informed practice?
Well, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, Ken. And when I started training in 2002, no one was talking about trauma. Everybody was talking about the effects of trauma, but no one was actually using the word trauma. And certainly in my training, it was never touched upon. Yeah, as a student, I worked with lots of traumatized people. And through the years, it really occurred to me that trauma-informed skills wasn't covered enough in first trainings, and there's a rise in presentations in trauma in the therapy room, and that qualified colleagues who may have gone through a training program just perhaps need some basic tools to be able to help traumatized clients. It's a different discipline to the meta model of therapy that you'll be using. It's an add-on, and sometimes it's just not taught in counselling first trainings.
And you mention it not being taught in core training within counselling. I guess it's understandable. You're learning the theory, you're learning the skills. Not a lot of presentation is covered in that core training. We're expected to do further training, continuing professional development in those areas. But what you've mentioned there, Rory, is really, really interesting. How you've said that with that, you recognized you hadn't had the training to work with trauma, yet you were seeing trauma present to you in therapy. And that is the interesting side of this. And I know that you did a little bit of a poll to find out if it's being trained now, because of course you can look to your core training and say, no, it wasn't trained then. What did you find out when you kind of went out and asked that question to today's graduates?
Well, it was interesting. I asked the question, how much trauma-informed training did you receive in your first trainings? And handily for me, Ken, 100 people answered, so that makes the percentages easy. And 93 of those 100 people said they'd received little or no training. It was only 7 out of that 100 who said it was well covered in their courses. And it struck me that there was a kind of need really for further training on this. If 97 people who qualified hadn't had any training in first trainings in trauma, then there was a deficit. And I know from when I practice that trauma is something that presents in the therapy room a lot. And if you're not equipped with it, then, my question would be, are you in service of the client? So I decided to produce a trauma-informed practice course. I actually completed a trauma-informed practice course myself and built that into my practice. And I thought that information, is essential to be shared with other practitioners.
And what do you think is the reason that trauma-informed practice isn't taught in first trainings?
Well, I think as we both myself and yourself, Ken, taught in counselling training. We both taught at practice level. We both taught a diploma through a awarding body. And the difficulty is that you teach to the curriculum, and the curriculum asks you to teach a particular meta model. Now, you could do an integrative model, and you could build part of that integration as trauma informed. But a lot of people maybe do a person-centered course. And to be honest, it's a 2-year training is effectively 66 weeks of actual classroom contact. It's not a lot. And in that, you're trying to get and help the students adapt their model and get a thorough understanding of the model they're being taught, along with all the other stuff that you've got to cram in to your teaching. So it's very difficult to actually find a space to teach anything else. And I think that's the issue. I think tutors do a great job. I'm in contact with tutors all the time, but ultimately they have to teach to the specification of the course, and there isn't enough room, I don't think, within those courses to teach trauma-informed practice.
It makes a lot of sense, and as you said, we stood side by side teaching, and the main focus was on the main modality that the student was learning. They were required to have personal therapy on our course in that modality. They were required to have supervision with a supervisor who was worked in that same modality that they were studying. So it was very much modality focused. And I'm wondering, I've done some of your trauma training, Rory, so I'm very grateful for that. And what I recognized in that is that some of the techniques that are used when identifying and working with trauma may not align with the main modality that the student is taught. So I guess that could be confusing in core training when you're trying to get the basic building blocks in of that main modality. But what would you say to any therapists who are concerned that using these techniques is outside of their main taught modality?
Yes, I mean, I met many very principled colleagues who are very loyal to their meta model and are very skilled within their meta model. And the conversation I had with myself after a lot of reflection was that I'm a person-centered therapist. I studied and practiced the work of Carl Rogers, and he died in 1987. And PTSD was only formally recognised as a separate mental health issue in 1980, until it came into diagnostic manuals in 1980. Before then, trauma was seen as a number of different things: alcoholism, drug addiction, depression. And then in 1980, I think it was DSM-3, Diagnostic Statistical Manual 3, it became an encompassing issue, and it was called post-traumatic stress disorder. Now it's called post-traumatic stress. They've dropped the disorder, thankfully, I think. Now, the models of therapy that we learn, they're 20th century models. They were invented in the 1940s and 1950s. They've stood the test of time. But what we do know about trauma is it's a 21st century phenomenon. In other words, our understanding of it is 21st century. So I think that as a principle, using these tools, it doesn't mean that you cannot integrate them within your model, but it does mean that I think if you're being in service of your clients expect a 21st century service. And by using trauma-informed techniques, it can be of such great service. So totally understand if people are very loyal to the model, but the model is a 20th century model. We practice in the 21st century, and we know so much more now.
Thank you. And I guess a question I have, I'm inquisitive, let's say, can you maybe share a trauma-informed technique that maybe our listeners now could adopt and consider for their own practice, Rory?
Yes, I mean, a very simple one is psychoeducation. So through the years, I've sadly met lots of clients who berated themselves because when they were attacked or raped, they didn't fight back and they didn't run away. And, they're left with this: if I'd have just done this, if I'd have just fought back. And what happens is it builds a kind of cycle, a feedback loop of self-loathing, that somehow they were responsible because they didn't do enough. And a simple intervention just to explain how the brain works in stressful situations. That, in very stressful situations, our middle brain goes into kind of executive mode. It kind of switches off or dulls down the thinking brain, the cerebral cortex, and the limbic system, our emotional brain, makes executive decisions. And one of those decisions is to assess the situation for the best possible outcome of survival. And, we go into what's called fight, flight, freeze, and recently flop. And flop is where we completely disassociate. And that is an executive that is a automatic pilot. It's almost like you're driving your car, and all of a sudden the vehicle takes over. You have no control over anything. And just to share that and say, in most, the research says that in most situations, most people in a stressful situation where they're under attack will actually freeze. And just a client to hear that can take away that kind of self-loathing, self-blame, and help them understand that actually their brain was doing, I guess, what it's programmed to do. It may not be a great situation, but it was making a choice. So if you run away, you might get caught and you might get hurt even more. If you fight back, you might lose and get hurt more. So this primitive part of the brain is basically making the executive decision. And I've got to be honest, Ken, the size of relief that I've seen from clients when I've just basically explained that concept, it's just amazing. It's bad enough coming and speaking about trauma and what's happened to a stranger, and also carrying the weight that somehow this was your fault. And if a bit of psychological education can remove a bit of weight, lift a bit of the weight of burden from the client, then I think that's well worth practicing slightly outside your modality.
Oh yeah. Oh, without a doubt. And I can just imagine the relief of this is not my fault, from going from that very toxic cycle within self, what I could have, what I should have done within that moment, to you didn't really have a choice of this. And that is given via the psychological education and explaining what is happening in the brain, which I know you cover in depth in the course that you deliver and that you touch on in the lecture. And of course, if you are a member of our counselling tutor CPD library, that's for qualified therapists, you can log in, and Rory's lecture is already there. It's called 5 Practical Trauma-Informed Interventions for Therapists. And it's going to walk you through 5 things that you can do to recognize and work with trauma within your practice and begin that journey. And of course, Rory, you also created a course, and I know because it's been over a year in the creation of your trauma-informed certificate in trauma-informed practice. And one of the things that you were very adamant about with the trauma-informed practice course is that it would be more than just some videos that somebody could work through in their own time. And you wanted a in-person tutor-led aspect on top of the theory. What is the reason for having the in-person get together of that group and the tutor-led section of your trauma-informed practice course?
So that particular course with the tutor-led allows practitioners to ask questions to get to clarify. And I think what's really important with any really important training is to be able to use your peers as a sounding board, so that we go into breakout rooms, we ask them questions, and the vicarious learning. We're both teachers, Ken, and I'm sure those people who are teachers are going back to their teaching qualifications. Vicarious learning, we do learn better off each other. Lectures are great; they're usually at the top of the pyramid. But vicarious learning, where we teach each other, and I sit and hear someone, and they go, "Well, I try this," and you go, "Oh, right, well, that sounds good." Really does compound the learning. And also, to clarify, people can ask questions. So that is why there's an in-person element to this training. And the feedback's been really good. People have really taken it to heart. They're really applying it. And also, I have to say that it's a craft-based course. It does cover theory, and we cover the theory in easy to understand chunks, if you like. But my purpose of building the course was to build something craft-based, so it could be applied to clients, not some high thinking, theoretical stuff that you could talk about in a lecture, but something you could say, there's the client, they're struggling. This is what I can do right here, right now. Craft-based training.
Oh, that is so, so important. So often we hear about theory to practice. Students often in our social groups say how they struggle to apply theory to practice. So by encompassing the practice element or the craft-based element into the training and then giving opportunity for the questions, plus having peers around you that are informed in the same training that you are doing. So you're not just having a conversation with a peer, you're having a very informed conversation with a peer who is also training in trauma, I guess adds another depth to the trauma training. It brings it to life. It makes it real, and it makes it real in practice and in your therapy room. And it's interesting. So many of the comments from the training is how much learning there has been from others sharing, from other participants of the training actually sharing how it is for them. Now, I know that it is only open, Rory, your certificate in trauma-informed practice through Counselling Tutor is only open to qualified therapists. Is there a reason why a student maybe in placement is not appropriate for this training at that stage of their practice development?
Yes, it was a bit of a difficult decision, but I think certainly I speak for myself as a student. It was difficult enough to encompass the meta model of therapy, and I think if you're then adding something else on, it can cause confusion, because at the end of the training, you have to evidence your person-centered skills or whatever modality you're in, and I think that's difficult enough. Without learning a different model, it can cause a little bit of confusion. And I've seen that myself. I've seen that students are practicing things, and even they get the modality and the new training very, very confused, and that ends up in their assignments and in their practice. And so it's sticking with the knitting. In an ideal world, and I know we don't live in an ideal world, placement providers should only be really putting clients in front of students who are the worried well. Severely traumatized clients should be seen by qualified practitioners who've been trained. I know that doesn't always happen, but that's the way it happened for me. When I qualified, when I did some more training, then it was noticeable that my clients became I'm going to use the word complex, probably a clumsy word, but there was more in-depth trauma and difficulty they were facing. So that's the reason why, Ken.
It's an informed reason, Rory, and I guess it's informed from being a trauma practitioner, but also having been a tutor. And you're 100% right. The primary goal of a student studying counselling theory and practice is to graduate and become a counsellor, and in order to do that you have to submit evidence of understanding of the core modality and the skills practice, and you're going to submit a recording, and you may be going to do an exam around that. And to contaminate the base model that you're learning with other information which is relevant and right and appropriate, it could weave itself in. You might be given a case study where you can maybe see underlying trauma, and you might start addressing that trauma in your answer and be referred on that because it doesn't match the criteria that the awarding body is looking out for. You might be doing a simulated skills session with a peer who presents with something that may be trauma linked, and you find yourself kind of ebbing into the working with that trauma, which again would not be appropriate to the modality, and it wouldn't hit the criteria. So it makes sense. But I think it's a great first training after training. I think it's a really good, I've now got my certificate, I'm qualified, I'm now going to study trauma. Because as you started out with this, Rory, the reason that you built this is because trauma presents in the therapy room all the time. And as you've said so many times, the client can only go as far as the counsellor can go. So if we're not seeing it, or we don't know what to do, or if we're unsure or not confident in working with that area, we can't go there with the client. So two things here. Number one is the lecture that you did, which is an hour-long lecture, 5 practical trauma-informed interventions for therapists. That is in the Counselor CPD library. And what is the takeaway from that? If somebody's a member of the CPD library, they watch that lecture, what are they going to take from that, Rory?
Well, I think, and I hope that people will take away that just adding some very simple, straightforward interventions can make such a difference to a client's life, and also that, you know, the modalities they're theories, they're basically theories, and some of them have stood the test of time. They really have, but we know so much more now, and I hope that people will take away that being a therapist is a developing, you know, you're doing professional formation. So it's good, I think, just to look at other things. And the interventions that I've put in, they're very simple. They're not groundbreaking interventions. We're not talking about curing people. We're talking about helping people stabilize themselves in the therapy room when they may be going to a very difficult place. So gentle, practical, time-proven interventions that can make such a difference, you know, to a client's life.
Thank you, Rory. And of course, then that step of maybe doing the 5 practical trauma-informed interventions and watching that lecture may kind of lead to somebody going, you know what, this is an important topic. I want to train deeper. And if somebody does choose to take the certificate in trauma-informed practice that you've developed, Rory, that tutor-led and with the backup of all the theory in the learning portal, what is the takeaway from that? What does that do for the person who does that course? What's the difference?
I think the difference is that well, I hope that people will take away. The course was created for these very things, that trauma is a very real and presenting issue, and it's probably more pertinent than we know. You know, trauma now we know affects a huge amount of people. Secondly, that there's a understanding of not only how trauma affects the emotional stage, but also the physical signs of the body, because we now know that people who've had early trauma, it affects their bodies. And being able to kind of meet the client, and if the client talks about maybe some form of illness they're going through, for us to be alerted that this is possibly, not exclusively, but possibly could be connected with trauma. So it tunes our clinical thinking up. Also, I talk about diversity. Diverse groups, certainly if the trauma is driven because of prejudice or inequality, they experience trauma in a different way. So we cover that. And also I cover the main models of trauma. And one of the things that I cover in depth, and all the models talk about this, is stabilization. Making sure that if you're working with a client who's really struggling, the thing to do first and foremost is to stabilize the client to a point where they can engage in what they're talking about, what they want to talk about, as opposed to overwhelming them and they become disassociated, become unwell, and probably leave therapy. And I'll leave you with this thought. So I'll leave the listener with this thought. I looked at all the models, and one of the models said, you know, there's a lot of techniques here, but ultimately, if the clients kind of find themselves in difficulty, just listen to them and talk with them.
Wow.
And I think that is probably the best lesson you can take away. But I think it's a 50-hour CPD course.
Yeah.
The wonderful thing about it for me is that with a lot of courses, you take them, you get your handouts, you leave, and then you think, oh, I can't remember what was being talked about. With this particular course, you get lifetime's access. So you can come back and refresh yourself. And a lot of former students they've just logged in again. And, you know, if they're not sure of something, they can use it as a reference. So my idea of building it was not only a course, but to build a kind of reference point that people can return to just to tune their practices up.
Wow. Well, thank you, Rory. And of course, if you're interested in signing up for the waiting list for Rory's course, you can go to counselingtutor.com. Right there on the homepage, just scroll down, look for the certificate in trauma-informed practice. The course is closed at the moment because it is underway. We have students in that at the moment, but we open it regularly. Put your name on the waiting list by clicking the little green button, and then we'll send you an email with more details about the course, the complete course handbook, so you can have a look at that with pricing, payment plans, and then of course as soon as enrollment opens again, you'll be first on the VIP waiting list, and you can make a decision of whether that training is right for you. And if you are a member of our Counsellor CPD library, you can log in now and go and have a look at 5 practical trauma-informed interventions for therapists, a lecture by Rory Lees-Oakes. And I'm going to feel very strange doing this. Rory, thank you for joining us on the Counselling Tutor podcast.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
There we go. I'll be very relieved next week when you're back to doing the interviews, Rory. It's really not my wheelhouse. You do it so much better than me. I felt very stilted there.
You did great. You did great.
Thank you. Well, there you have it. That was our Practice Matters for the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor podcast. And as we go out of Counselling Matters, thanking Rory very, very much for that interview, we go into Student Services, where we recognise you're your student, you're on your formal journey to become a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist. And as we make this podcast, as it goes out in real time, which is late April, early May of 2024, if you're listening in real time, it's submission time. It's the time when those final bits of work are being submitted, the final portfolios, on many levels, with 2, 3, 4 degrees. There's work that needs to be submitted right now. Usually there's placements happening if you're not graduating. There's so much happening. And I guess preparing for those submissions, those final submissions, or that work that we need to hand over, or those exams that we need to do, or that recorded session that you need to submit for evaluation, it can cause a lot of anxiety, Rory. What can we consider in the preparation for a time like this? Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counselingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your counselling tutor discount. That's counselingskillsacademy.com.
Yeah, I always think that, you know, this time of year where people are submitting, there may be Vivas, there may be exams, it could be final portfolios. It's a bit like the last kind of 100 meters at a marathon, isn't it? Where you're a bit fatigued and you try to get across the finish line. So in terms of thinking about getting the best result, I think the first thing to do is to manage expectations. So if you're setting a final piece, if you're being set a final piece of work, get clarity on what needs to be in it. And good tutors, and there's a lot of them about, should give very, very thorough briefings. I know when we taught, we started to brief at range from about March. I think it was March. We'd pick a topic that needed to be in the final portfolio, and we'd take some time and inspect it and talk about it at depth. So that's the first thing. Also, if it's a case of exams, really get an understanding of what the exam is. Is it going to be in a room? Are you going to be timed? Try to get a good solid picture of what it's going to be like, because if you have an understanding of what you're going to encounter, it doesn't become as frightening, because exams, final portfolios, I don't know about you, Ken, but they always catapult me back to school. When
Yep.
I think of an exam, I just think of, we're all stretched out kids at the end of the day. I've said this many times. And, managing our kind of emotional state around that, and trying to stay in the adult. I know it's so difficult, there's a lot depending on it. So if it's an exam situation, find out what the exam was like, try and speak to other people, not about what they were asked, but what about what it was like? What did you do? Who was there? What was the room like? How long did it take? What learning did they come away from? So when you go in, it's almost like you've rehearsed it. You go in and thinking, oh, there's the table, there's where I sit, this is the time, that's the person at the front. Because we know that when you get stressed, our top brains switch off. So the key thing is to try to be as least stressed as possible, and also to go over what's being asked. So, if it's an exam, they may give you in advance what's being asked. Go over it, look at the question in detail. And it's interesting in our Facebook group, and if you want to join our Facebook group, if you go to Facebook, if you go to Facebook and just type in Counselling Tutor, you'll find us and just pop in to the group. There's a few people speaking about, exams and what that was like and how they were struggling with it. And I think when I came away from those conversations was that being prepared, and also having a really good understanding of the subjects. And I'm going to speak to people who hold degrees. I think that people who hold degrees, who've done degree training, and maybe another subject, kind of struggle with NVQs. And NVQs are National Vocational Qualifications. That's what they taught. That's what they were when we taught. But they're asking specific questions. This isn't the questions that are asked are not a test of your intellect. They're a test of your application. So keep that in mind. It's how you're applying the theory.
Yeah.
They're not interested in how much you've read or how wide read you are, which is wonderful. They're asking you a specific question, and look at that question and try and break it down. And you start off with the verb, which is analyze or critically evaluate, and look at that and find out what that means. And then once you've got that, and so analyze is, you're looking at two different things and you're weighing them up and you're going, well, there's this here and that says that and this says that. But actually, when we look at both these things, this is what I found. That's an analysis. So understand those verbs, spend a lot of time going through the verbs so that you're familiar with it. And when you're doing your exam or your final portfolio, take a breath, go back to the question and ask yourself this: am I answering the question? Because that's all that counts at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's interesting. My daughter is doing her final part of her degree at the moment, and there's no place for, I feel, within her submission. There's just no place for it. It's not about her. It's about the data and it's about the research, and that is all that is required. And counseling is different, because we are part of the learning. We are using ourselves, we're using our own lives and our own experience and our own growth, and what the patterns that we go through during our training as part of the application of this. So you are welcome in your assignment and in your exam, because you're going to be reflecting. So the words I, and looking at how it is for you. And there was a lot to unpick in what you mentioned there, Rory. I think that's worth going back on and listening to again, because also it's almost like a masterclass in preparing for assignments. You gave a lot of your experience in that. One of the things that I recognize is how the anxiety can go up as you get closer to the assignment, and from my side, you are good enough, because that imposter syndrome can come in. I'm not good enough. I can't do this. And I recognize that from my own journey. The closer I got to submitting my final piece of work, the more the more I was questioning, have I got this right? And comparing it with peers, asking what they're doing was not good for me, because they might be doing something different to me or taking a different look on something. And I was going, oh, I got this wrong. And I started questioning myself. And I'm just good enough here was really good and was really helpful for me. And resistance tends to get greater the closer you come to a great outcome. And I think about we've got some jets. There's a training camp close to us where they fly jet fighter planes, and I was thinking about the jet fighter. They can break the sound barrier, but the closer they get to breaking the sound barrier, the more the resistance, the air resistance, builds up in front of the aeroplane, and then at the moment it breaks through and bang, and it goes through. There's always greatest resistance just before breaking through. In my own training, Rory, I actually started telling myself, you know what, I don't really need to get my final certificate. I don't really need to qualify because I've had so much growth and so much learning through my arc of training. It's okay. I wonder if I even need to submit my final piece of work. And this was all based in me not really believing that I could do it. So if you kind of have those feelings, they're not unique to you. Many people share them, and it's just about put your head down, carry on. You are good enough. You've got yourself here. It's just that final push. Resistance can be greatest just before that final breakthrough. You can do this. Come on, you can do it.
Yes, and you know, for the inevitable person who opens the envelope and finds that they've not passed the first time, I've definitely been there. And I was there all through my diploma training. I think I didn't pass a single assignment in the entire 3 years that I trained first off. And interestingly enough, about a year later, I trained to be a teacher, and I passed every assignment off the bat. And that wasn't because I got any cleverer. That was because I understood how to write assignments. That's all it is. So if you are one of those persons who's opened your letter and it's not the news you want, don't go down the road of saying, you know, you're not good enough, and you know, you failed. You go along the route of first attempts in learning. That's what a fail means. First attempts in learning. Hold on to that. Keep going forward. Don't give up, and you too will get there. Sometimes the road is slightly longer for, you know, some people than others, but don't give up. You deserve to pass. If you've got this far, if you're 100 meters from the finish line and you fall over, then get up and pull yourself across the finish line. And that would be my observation. I've said that a lot to learners over the years, Ken. I know you have.
Yeah, well, Rory, myself, all of the team at Counselling Tutor, we work in service of you as students. That's, if you look on our website, it is absolutely jam-packed with information to help you revise, get the key learning outcomes. Our podcast, which is also free, has so much information on. You may have looked at the YouTube channel of Counselling Tutor, also full of the theories and skills. And we do this in service of you, the student, because we believe that the most important people in counselling, going as professionals going into counselling, are you, the students. Really, there is such a need. There is such a need for counsellors out in the world at the moment. You are needed. And the place to go back to when you're struggling, when you don't know if you can take those last steps, when you feel that resistance building up, is ask yourself this one question: why did you start studying in the first place? What is your why? What is your reason for doing this? And so often, and certainly in my case, the reason is I believed that I wanted to make a difference out in the world. And there's so few people that want to make a difference in the lives of others. If you look at the world as it is today, it's very much a self-serving, what I can do, my career, how high I can climb, what I can amass in assets. And to have a mindset of, I want to serve others, I want to make a difference in other people's lives, makes you special from the outset. It really, really does. And it is just worth it. It's worth every single step. And of course, we also built the Counselling Study Resource, which is a library that contains the theory, the skills, the practice that you will cover in your training. And that we built, why? To assist students in getting there and hopefully reducing the anxiety that can build up, that self-doubt that can build up. So we're thinking of you, we're shouting for you, we're cheering from you here at Counselling Tutor. I wish everybody all of the best with their final work that they are submitting. Any last thoughts from you, Rory?
Yeah, I was going to say hallelujah when you said that. Hallelujah, Ken. I agree with that so much. Yeah, and, why not memorialise your success by popping a picture of your graduation into the Facebook line? And there are two reasons for that. I like to see happy people who've graduated, and also it's so inspiring for those who are coming behind you, those maybe in the next year. I think it gives people a ray of hope, because you're now leading the way. You'll have crossed the finish line. You'll be having the accolade, and rightly so. And, part of that as you move into professional life is holding the torch up for those who follow. So pop your pictures in, pop your celebration, whether it's throwing your hat in the air or just quietly contemplating. And I don't know about you, Ken, but I'll be mightily looking forward to seeing all those success stories.
Oh, yes.
And all those people who go on to the world to help others.
Oh, yes. And thank you for joining us today. This is episode 300 of the Counselling Tutor podcast.
Yes, we started today with ethical, sustainable practice, and we had a little bit of an investigation and a bit of a conversation about international working, the things that you need to consider if you're working internationally. And don't forget, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, look at episode 300 in the podcast tab, there is a handout on that waiting for you, covering the points and the topics that we discussed. We moved on to practice matters, and the interviewee today was me. And Ken interviewed me on 5 practical trauma-informed interventions for therapists. It's a lecture that's in the CPD library. And we also talked about the trauma-informed practice course that I've created to help qualified counsellors be able to work in a trauma-informed way and, maybe serve their clients in a different way. And then student services, we talked about preparing for final submissions and exams, things to think about and to look forward to. And as always, if I could just ask you a little favour, if you've enjoyed our podcast today, why don't you leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform? It's a simple way to support us and help our community grow. And to be honest, me and Ken just love a nice review. It just makes our day. Also, if you know someone who might appreciate today's episode, share it on your social media or drop them an email or just tell them about it, because, the more listeners we can get, the more we can share the message. And we like more ears. We like more ears on the podcast. And, thank you for allowing us, Ken and myself, to be part of your journey. So until the next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counsellor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.